Now, one thing you mentioned was, what have I done since the Forge? I mean, right, it's been 8 years since I closed it, right? And you should know that I find that a frustrating question because, of course, I've been very active. For a while, I had a small forum that was basically off of the Indie-RPGs site. And that was fine. It was just really a way to talk without my head being like filled with agony from managing something like the Forge for so long. And I went and uh, ran crowdfunding for a couple of projects and started up consulting. Now, one thing I'm bad at is promotion. So even though I did a lot of very productive consulting, there was at the time I had no way of understanding how to promote it and let people know that I was doing it. Um, and I also really, really liked working on the annotations for Sorcerer. It really gave that game a jump start to get reissued and have the new covers and have the annotations. And I really liked doing that. So I also spent a lot of time in Italy, where a lot of my games had been translated. So I would go to Italy frequently and participate in conventions there and try to create more of connection, among people there. So those were things for me. I always had a really big international customer base. At one point, I and a bunch of other publishers compared our commerce, and unlike most of them, whose customer base was primarily American, mine was at least half international. So I said I should work with that. I should become more international, right, as what I do. And so I was focusing on that. So for my, for another, again, when I talk about Kickstarter, I'm speaking from experience. I had two profitable Kickstarters, and I did
Yeah.
it basically by groping, killing my way through the infrastructure and never, ever doing things like, a series of organized stretch goals and all sorts of stuff like that, which is a really bad idea most of the time. So anyway, the second one that succeeded, I did three, two succeeded. The second one that succeeded was for Circle of Hands, which is right here, by coincidence. I don't know if you're familiar with Circle of Hands.
No, I'm not
No?
familiar with
Okay.
this one.
Well, it's after writing those Fantasy Heartbreaker essays back in the early 2000s, one thing that I discovered in a cardboard box, right? Those cardboard boxes that shirts often come in when you buy them, like formal
Yes.
shirts, right? Just the right size for notebook paper, for printer paper, standard size
Yeah.
paper, right? Well, in that was a wad of typed pages from the early 90s of a Fantasy Heartbreaker that I wrote. And
Oh,
I had
right.
forgotten completely about it. Even through writing those essays, I'd forgotten about it. And I pulled it out and I was like, hey, this is pretty good. So I said, you know what? I'm going to redeem this thing. I'm going to I'm going to take everything I know. I'm going to keep the original vision. I'm going to keep every aspect of the system that works. And we're going to make a game out of this. And so Circle of Hands, I'm really proud of. It's a really, really fun game. And it's one of my strongest designs, but it's also got weird artifacts from its origins too. So anyway, I did that. That was around 2015, 2016. And I was doing a lot of consulting and actually making some pretty good money through that. So then had to give a lot of thought to what I would do once I moved to Sweden, which we did 3 years ago. And so I said, all right, well, either I can completely let role playing, slough away and just spend the rest of my time playing games and enjoying them and talking to the two people that I want to talk to online. Or I could make a new company and try something new. And so I have. So Adept Play is my company in Sweden. And Adept Play is a dedicated attempt to take what I have managed to do successfully and make it all active again. And so publishing games is actually not my top priority. Although I should have my games available and printed here in Europe, and that hasn't happened partly because of Corona. But that was one of the plans for 2020, was simply to have them all be available. But the idea of making games as an ongoing, what are you publishing next? What's next, Ron? What's the next game, right? Fuck all that. I'm tired of it. I'll put them out in cheap form, PDF, and print them when and if anybody wants, but I'm not going to make a big deal out of being a publisher anymore. So, so that's one thing. On the other hand, I am very welcome here in the book publishing industry of Sweden, I have discovered. And so when and if I get my shit together, which was harder this year than it should have been, obviously, that'll happen. But again, that's not the top priority. The top priorities are instead to promote the enjoyment of real play. You may have noticed that slick, enjoyable, audience-oriented depictions of play, now called actual play, are very popular, right? And that's fine. But that's not really ever going to show people what role-playing is like, or how to do it, or what's really even enjoyable about it. You're watching actors play role players role-playing.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I mean, are they good at it? Yes, they're hilarious. I'm not, as entertainment, I'm not going to, kick about that. As consumed entertainment, paid for entertainment, why not? Right? Go ahead. But not to be too crude about it, but I hope you can see the parallel with porn.
Yeah.
Right? No, porn is performance art. Fine. But it's not having sex. And so say you're a sex positive activist. You're not going to as long as porn isn't actually, performing economic or other, injustices, fine. But you're not going to send people to go watch porn to go learn how to do it.
Yeah.
Right? So think of me as that side of presenting and talking about role playing. You go to At Its Play, you will see people discussing what it's like actually to do it. You're going to actually be able to follow, a produced set of small f fiction through the course of play of a game. You're going to enjoy seeing how people do this. Now, I also offer consulting there. So you can actually see, and I record it, so you can see how it works when we talk about designing a game. You can also participate in seminars, which are when there's a topic and we just have a dedicated discussion for it, or a dedicated presentation or conversation or something. But those are what I do because I want to promote the activity in terms of its features that really haven't been well understood. That here's my pitch, and this is perhaps the distillation of many of those essays that you've read. First, that if we look at all kinds of activities that people do for fun together, you're going to find a spectrum from fully grassroots, non-monetized, purely emergent as a social phenomenon, all the way up to highly institutionalized and highly monetized and highly mass marketed, right? Mass produced. So imagine somebody who happens to play guitar, whose friends enjoy their guitar playing, and who is encouraged to bring their guitar whenever there's a party. And everybody will sing, I don't know, the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald together with them, right? Or American Pie or something, right? That they're good at playing. And everybody looks forward to doing this at the parties. Maybe even a few people who will get together and play together at parties and who occasionally will play at a local club or a bar. But they don't really consider themselves a band. Their band's name is kind of just for fun. It's a joke even, right? So imagine that all the way up to the biggest name pop bands that you know, right? All the way, that whole spectrum. You're going to find that same spectrum for sports, all the way from the local people kicking around the football on the field, all the way to hardcore, world-based, international sports media, right?
Yeah.
You're going to see the whole spectrum. But when you talk about the production of fiction, it stops. It stops at the end of commerce. As soon as commerce stops, it stops. Nobody expects the people playing soccer for fun to yearn to become financial successes, right? And to strive to be financial successes in doing it. But if you are a writer, you're not a real writer unless you're getting paid. Right? There is no folk component to the creation of stories. Even fanfic is defined by its relationship to the commercial product. You're defining yourself as a consumer of that product. And of course, we all know that fanfic authors yearn and dream to be like those few who have hopped the line, right? To become real writers. Do you see what I'm getting at? Where is our folk activity of the creation of fiction?
That's a very, very good point. As someone who's also very interested in writing, I do tend to have, realizing there's that very clear distinction between paid writing and writing for leisure or anything like that. Are you saying that there is that need to fill in the rest of that spectrum for tabletop role-playing games?
Well, need is one of those interesting questions. I doubt that anybody out there is going to find a mass movement who's interested in what Ron thinks they need.
Yeah.
So I tend not to use that term. What I am saying is that people are perfectly capable of it, just as they are perfectly capable, or someone, or some few of them, or maybe even more than a few, are perfectly capable of playing the guitar at parties or having a fun game of soccer down the street. And that we actually have a medium in which this is possible.
Yeah.
That role-playing has a bunch of very silly terms associated with it as legacy. One of them is the term role-playing itself. Right? It's a legacy term. Who cares what it literally means? It doesn't. Second, game. Also a legacy term. Who cares what it means? It doesn't. Right? So I say role-playing game, that's a legacy term. It has nothing to do with content. What we're really talking about is the construction of fiction as a medium. The medium of it. That as we play, in the path of what we have played, fiction has occurred.
Okay, yeah.
And so, and again, small f, right? We typically think of fiction as a specific thing on a bookshelf, or as something with a structure, like for movies or novels or something like that. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about it in the most raw form of the word.